Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world where bedtime wasn't soft pillows, cozy blankets, and a snooze button. Instead, it was drafty halls, smoky hearths, and sleep routines that feel downright alien today. You're stepping into medieval nights, where nothing about closing your eyes was ordinary. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a single night of it without complaining. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You imagine lying down in a medieval home, the fire flickering low, the scent of smoke in the air. Unlike your 8 hours of straight-through sleep, people back then followed a rhythm of first sleep and second sleep. It was natural in a world without electric light. You'd doze for a few hours, wake around midnight, and then slip back under for another round until dawn. This wasn't insomnia. It was expected. People even planned their lives around it. Some prayed, some poked the fire, and some used the quiet to whisper with a partner. Others might walk to a neighbor's house for a chat before heading back to bed. Historians still argue whether this two-part sleep was healthier than the unbroken kind we cling to today. Some research suggests that when people are left in darkness long enough, their bodies naturally fall into this segmented rhythm. So maybe your 3 a.m. wake-ups aren't a flaw. They're echoes of a medieval pattern that your body hasn't entirely forgotten. Of course, if you're imagining slipping back under your plush comforter, think again. You'd be lying on a sack, stuffed with straw, maybe feathers if you were lucky, stretched across a rope frame that sagged unless tightened daily. The phrase, sleep tight, wasn't just cute, it was literal. Miss a night of tightening, and the ropes sagged until you slid into the middle like a sack of laundry. Not exactly restful. The room itself wasn't silent either. You might hear the creak of timbers, the muffled snores of family packed close by, and the scuttling of rats or mice in the thatch overhead. Outside, bells tolled the hours, reminding you that the night was long and broken into measured segments. Unlike your noise machine, these sounds weren't optional, and you learned to fold them into your rest, whether you liked it or not. And yet, there's something almost hypnotic about it. You drift off, waking in the middle of the night to stir the embers, stretch, maybe even whisper a short prayer before sliding back into your second sleep. In its own way, it feels natural, like the night itself has two halves meant to cradle you separately. The only problem? You're not built for it anymore. Your alarms, work schedules, and glowing screens demand one block of rest, and the medieval rhythm would probably leave you groggy and irritated. You think you could adjust, but the truth is, you probably wouldn't last long in this strange nighttime world. You've barely adjusted to the idea of sleeping in 2 rounds when another shock hits you. You're not alone in that bed. Privacy, at least the way you understand it, just doesn't exist here. Instead, the bed is a crowded stage of survival, shared warmth, and awkward closeness that would probably make you squirm. Families piled in together, parents, children, maybe even servants tucked in at the edges, all pressed shoulder to shoulder. If you're poor, the choice isn't between a single or a double mattress. It's whether you get enough straw space to stretch your legs. You roll to the side, bumping into someone else's elbow. Maybe it's your brother. Maybe it's your grandmother. Or maybe it's a complete stranger if you're traveling. The logic is simple. Heat is life. In drafty houses with thin walls, your body is a radiator, and survival often trumps comfort. Even animals joined the sleepover. A pig in the corner might grunt softly through the night, or a dog curls near your feet to add another layer of warmth. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was a practical choice. No heating bills, just shared breath and body heat. And don't think the wealthy escaped the closeness either. Even in castles, servants often slept on pallets in the Lord's chamber, ready to jump up if needed. A royal bed might be draped in rich curtains, but behind those curtains, it was still common to share space. Your idea of the master bedroom as a private sanctuary didn't exist yet. The bed was communal, functional, and sometimes ceremonial. The funny thing is, historians still argue whether this crowding bonded families more tightly or drove them insane. Imagine trying to get rest while half your household tosses and turns beside you. Yet for many, the nightly squeeze was simply normal. Children learned early to nestle between siblings. Parents expected little privacy. Servants knew their place near the hearth or tucked in the corner. As you lie there, pressed into the warmth of others, you notice how strange it feels to surrender your personal bubble. No one asks if you're comfortable. Comfort isn't the point. Survival is. And oddly, there's something soothing about that shared breathing. A low chorus of snores, sighs, and shifting limbs. You may not like it, but the warmth and closeness keep you alive in a world where frost creeps through the cracks of wooden walls. Of course, the downside becomes obvious fast. You can't roll over without bumping someone awake. You can't stretch without a sharp kick from the opposite side. And you definitely can't escape the smells. A room full of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and smoke from the fire makes for a heavy, lingering perfume. Forget lavender sachets. This is reality. Still, this was life. To medieval people, the idea of a single bed for one person would seem lonely, even wasteful. Beds weren't just for sleeping, they were tools for surviving the night. And as you shift under the covers, sharing heat with strangers, you realize that while you might survive one night this way, your modern sensibilities would unravel fast. You wake with a stiff back, and a reminder that medieval beds were not designed with your comfort in mind. The word bed itself almost feels too generous. What you're lying on is more like a sack stuffed with whatever filler your household can afford. For most peasants, that means straw or hay, packed into a coarse linen bag. The material grows musty quickly, flattened after weeks of tossing and turning, and often replaced only when it becomes unbearable. You shift and hear the faint crunch beneath you, a reminder that this bed has more in common with a barn floor than a mattress showroom dot. If you're a little wealthier, maybe your bedding is filled with wool, reeds, or feathers. A feather mattress sounds luxurious until you realize the feathers poke through the fabric, scratching at your skin while you try to doze. Then there's the frame, wooden and simple, with ropes strung across like a grid to hold the mattress. Those ropes slacken constantly, and if you forget to tighten them, you end up sliding toward the sagging middle. That old phrase, sleep tight, isn't a poetic goodnight wish, it's literally instructions. Tighten the ropes, or your night will be even worse. Dot above you, a canopy might hang not for style, but to block drafts and keep pests from falling through the thatch roof. In grander houses, the canopy becomes decorative, embroidered with patterns and family crests. But the principle is the same. Keep the cold and critters away. For peasants, even a simple cloth strung overhead is better than nothing. You notice the bedding too. Sheets are rare luxuries for common folk. More often, you're wrapped in woolen blankets, heavy and scratchy, layered as thick as your family can afford. Nobles, of course, indulge in linen sheets and furs thrown over the top. They might even line their beds with cushions, making the bed a statement piece as much as a sleeping space. For kings and queens, the bed was sometimes the most expensive piece of furniture in the room, designed to impress visitors during the day before being drawn with curtains at night. Historians still argue whether beds in peasant homes were shared equally, or if parents reserved the best straw sacks while children curled near the hearth. Evidence suggests both were true, depending on the household. What's certain is that beds were functional above all else. Softness was secondary. Longevity was questionable. And comfort was a dream for the future. As you lie there, staring up at a canopy that sags with smoke stains, you can't help comparing it to your own bedroom. Your mattress, likely engineered with springs or foam, is designed for decades of use. In medieval times, beds were seasonal chores, dismantled, refilled, repaired, or even completely replaced with each harvest. You'd empty out the straw, toss it on the dung heap, and stuff in a fresh batch. Recycling, yes, but also a reminder of how little permanence sleep offered. And then there's the smell. Straw holds on to every ounce of moisture, every bit of sweat, every flea that finds its way in. The bed itself becomes a living thing, carrying the history of every night you've lain on it. You curl deeper into the blanket, wishing for a pillow. If you're lucky, there's a small sack stuffed with feathers or rags. If you're not, you use your arm. Nobles, meanwhile, might rest their heads on embroidered pillows, perfumed with herbs to mask the must. You shift again, ropes groaning under your weight, and realize just how precarious medieval sleep really was. You aren't sinking into a cloud, you're balancing on a frame of wood and twine, praying nothing collapses. And even if the bed holds, the pests hiding in the straw are waiting. But that, unfortunately, is something you'll have to face as the night goes on. You settle back into the scratchy bedding. But before your eyes even close, there's one more step that every medieval sleeper takes rituals. In a world where medicine is shaky and night is filled with danger, you don't just flop down and hope for the best. You armor yourself with prayers, charms, and half-whispered routines meant to keep nightmares and evil at bay. You picture yourself lying there, fingers crossed under the blanket as you mumble the Pater Noster, because skipping it feels like inviting trouble. The darkness outside isn't just absence of light. It's a living thing, teeming with spirits, demons, and creatures that might slip through the cracks in your home. To fight back, people leaned on faith. A prayer before bed wasn't optional. It was insurance. Parents taught their children little rhymes, short blessings to say before sleep, words to guard the soul while the body rested. Superstition bled into the smallest gestures. Maybe you trace the sign of the cross over your chest. Maybe you sprinkle a pinch of holy water near the bedpost. Some even slipped charms under the pillow, a carved amulet, a sprig of herbs, a tiny relic if they could afford one. And if you're especially nervous, you mutter protective words against witches, because in the medieval mind, night was their playground. Historians still argue whether these rituals brought genuine comfort or just heightened fear, but there's no denying their role. A bedtime prayer was as routine as pulling a blanket over your shoulders. Without it, sleep felt exposed, almost reckless. Imagine the weight of believing your very soul could wander during dreams, vulnerable to attack if you hadn't prepared Dot. And then there were the quirky habits. Some people believed sleeping on your left side opened the door to bad dreams, while the right side was safer, blessed. Others swore that placing an iron knife under the bed scared away evil spirits. You might tuck garlic in the rafters, or hang a protective charm above the doorframe. For infants, parents often tied amulets around tiny wrists or tucked relics into the cradle, desperate to ward off sudden illness in the night. Even the wealthy weren't immune. Nobles might ask priests to bless their bedchambers or carry holy relics with them on journeys. Queenly chambers sometimes had candles blessed by monks, meant to burn until morning, as if their faint glow could chase away the invisible. The poor made do with charms carved from bone or whispered incantations learned from neighbors. It's easy to roll your eyes at all this, but you also know how dark the medieval night was. Without street lamps, without even a hum of electricity, the world outside your door was a void. In that silence, your imagination bloomed. A creak in the rafters might be rats or something worse. And so, the rituals grew. They were both shield and comfort, a way of saying, I've done what I can. Now I can sleep. You curl deeper into the bed, repeating words you barely believe, and wonder how long you'd last without your nightlight or phone screen to soften the dark. Probably not long. In a world where superstition ruled the night, you'd find yourself whispering charms too, if only to buy a little peace before drifting off. The prayers fade into silence, and your eyes adjust to the dim glow around the room. Unlike your modern switch-on lamp, medieval light at night was fragile and fleeting. If you wanted to see past the fire's dying embers, you needed a rushlight or a candle, and both came with quirks that would drive you mad. You glance at the rushlight first. It's nothing more than a dried reed, peeled and dipped in animal fat, propped up in a little holder. It burns with a sputtering hiss, flaring bright one moment, and then shrinking to a weak glow the next. The light dances across the rough wooden beams, creating more shadow than safety. It's cheap, though, and for peasants, that's reason enough. You can almost hear the quiet crackle, smell the faint tang of burning fat, and feel the way smoke curls into your nose as you lie there. If you're a bit better off, maybe you've got a tallow candle. It's sturdier than a rushlight, but far from pleasant. Made from rendered animal fat, it gives off a greasy smoke and a smell that lingers in your hair and clothes. Light enough candles in one room, and the stench is enough to chase you outside. Yet it's brighter, steadier, and lasts longer. For most homes, this was the gold standard. Beeswax candles existed, but they were expensive luxuries, usually reserved for churches or the homes of the wealthy. Their flame was steadier, their smell sweeter, but they were out of reach for almost everyone Historians still argue whether peasants used night lighting often or only sparingly to save resources. Some evidence suggests families let the fire burn down to embers and simply embraced the dark, waking with the dawn instead. Others point to accounts of people moving through villages by candle or torchlight, proving that even the poor relied on weak flames when needed. Whatever the case, darkness wasn't avoided. It was endured. And the atmosphere these lights created. Imagine the flicker of shadows climbing the walls, stretching, shrinking, twisting as the wick leans. A room never felt still. The smallest movement, a moth brushing past, a draft sneaking under the door, sent shadows swaying, like figures lurking at the edge of your vision. For a child, or even a grown adult, that kind of light played tricks on the mind. You shift and realize how precious a single flame feels in this blackness. You'd guard it carefully, trimming the wick, keeping it away from drafts, even shielding it with your hand as you move. Matches don't exist yet. Fire itself is precious. Lose the flame, and relighting it means fumbling with flint and steel, begging a neighbor to lend you a spark. It's enough to make you cling to the tiny glow like a lifeline. Of course, it also means your bedroom smells like a butcher's shop, with the constant smoke of tallow clinging to everything. You wrinkle your nose and imagine what visitors must have thought, stepping into a chamber lit with flickering, greasy candles. Not exactly romantic. Yet for people of the time, this was normal, even comforting. A candle meant safety. A rushlight meant you weren't blind. You settle back, staring at the way the flame paints the rafters, and realize that medieval nights were never truly dark, but they were never truly bright either. Just a liminal world of flicker and shadow, half light and imagination. And in that twilight space, you drift, both soothed and unsettled, grateful for the glow, even as it fades. You shift under the scratchy blanket, the candle guttering low, and it hits you. This room is never truly quiet. Silence, as you know it, just doesn't exist here. Night in the medieval world is alive with sound, and most of it you'd rather not hear. The first and most obvious is snoring. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with family or strangers, and someone always sounds like they're sawing through timber. A father rattles with deep, guttural snores. A child kicks and whimpers in half-dream. A grandmother coughs in her sleep, each wheeze echoing in the rafters. It's a symphony you never signed up for, but it plays on night after night, above you. Wooden beams creak, shifting as the house cools. Mice and rats scuttle through the thatch, claws scratching, tails brushing. Sometimes you hear a faint thump as a cat leaps after them, knocking dust down onto your pillow. The sound makes you flinch, and you realize that rest comes not by blocking it out, but by sinking into it until it becomes the lullaby of your world. Then there are the bells. Churches don't sleep. Somewhere in the distance, the bells toll, marking hours through the dark. Midnight prayers, matins before dawn, each clang splitting the night like a reminder that time is marching forward. For monks or nuns, that bell means it's time to rise, shuffle to the chapel, and chant by candlelight. For you, lying in bed, it's just another interruption in the dreamscape. And outside, the night carries every sound. Dogs bark at passing shadows. Owls hoot from rafters or trees. A late traveler's footsteps crunch on frosty earth. Sometimes it's the sound of revelry from an inn. Laughter carried through thin air. colliding with your attempt at sleep. Other times, it's a shout, a clang of metal, a reminder that night is also when thieves prowl. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers grew so used to this soundscape that they barely noticed it, or if fragmented sleep was simply accepted as unavoidable. What's clear is that no one expected silence. Quiet nights were eerie, almost suspicious, like the world had gone still for a reason you didn't want to discover. There's also the unsettling chorus of the natural world. Wind whistling through cracks, making the shutters rattle. Rain dripping steadily into buckets you've set out to catch leaks in the roof. The croak of frogs in summer. The distant howl of wolves in harsher regions. In cities, the noise changes drunken voices. Carts creaking down cobblestones. The splash of chamber pots being emptied into the street. Imagine trying to drift off, knowing that at any moment, a splash from above could catch you if you're unlucky enough to be outside. And then there's the most human sound of all. Whispered voices. People using the break between first and second sleep to talk in the dark. Confessions made under blankets. Gossip traded in hushed tones. Secrets shared while children pretend to dream. In a world without private diaries or glowing phone screens, night became the time for quiet words no one else was meant to hear. You pull the blanket tighter, listening to the overlapping layers of noise. It should be maddening, but in its own way, it's grounding. Each sound reminds you that life is happening all around, even while you try to rest. And though you grumble, part of you knows that in a medieval night, silence would feel far more terrifying. You close your eyes, willing yourself to ignore the snores and bells, but the real nightmare is waiting right under the blanket. Medieval beds aren't just lumpy and sagging, they're alive. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are your true roommates, and no amount of prayers or charms can keep them away. You scratch at your arm, half asleep, realizing the itch isn't in your imagination. The straw mattress you're lying on is the perfect home for insects, warm and damp with sweat, packed with tiny places to hide. Bedbugs creep along the seams, waiting until your body heat draws them out. Fleas hop from one sleeper to another. Tiny acrobats spreading bites, and in the worst cases, disease. And lice? They're everywhere. In your hair, on your clothing, crawling in the seams of your blanket. You shift uncomfortably, wondering how anyone managed to rest while being constantly nibbled alive. For peasants, this was simply life. Washing was infrequent, mattresses weren't replaced often, and infestations were constant. People tried remedies, herbs tucked into bedding, smoke fumigation, even sprinkling ashes or herbs in the straw, but nothing truly worked. The critters always came back. In wealthier homes, feather beds didn't help much either. Soft feathers still harbored lice, and sometimes bugs would nest in the cushions themselves. You think about how often medieval people must have scratched through the night, half-conscious, waking with red welts. Historians still argue whether they were more tolerant of the discomfort, or simply resigned to it. After all, if everyone around you is just as itchy, maybe you don't even think of it as unusual. But once in a while, chronic infestations could lead to real suffering. Skin infections, fevers, even outbreaks of plague carried by flea bites. The quirky side of it. Some households believed that a few insects in your bed actually kept you humble, a reminder that earthly life was full of struggle. Others joked about fleas as though they were mischievous companions. Medieval jokes and poetry even mentioned scratching at night as a kind of shared universal experience. Imagine that, itching as a cultural inside joke. You shift again, pulling the blanket tight, as if that will help, but it doesn't. The blanket itself is full of lice. You imagine a child beside you, absent-mindedly scratching their scalp, while the grandmother across the bed runs a comb through her hair, pulling out little crawling dots that tumble onto the floor. Knit combs were real and necessary, but they never solved the problem completely. Even nobility, wrapped in fur-lined bedding, weren't immune. Servants might brush and beat the mattresses to shake out pests, but it was a losing battle. Some nobles even traveled with personal bedding to avoid catching infestations from inns. And yet, no matter the effort, the insects always found their way back. You lie still, realizing that sleep here is a negotiation. You accept the constant itch, the occasional bite, and try to slip into dreams anyway. It's not comfortable, not restful in the modern sense, but it's survival. You might think you'd last one night, but honestly, the first flea bite would probably send you packing. You scratch your arm again, trying to ignore the crawling sensation when a draft snakes under the blanket. Suddenly you realize that in medieval times, battling temperature was just as relentless as battling pests. Nights weren't cozy. They were tests of endurance against cold that cut to the bone, or heat that suffocated under heavy wool. You imagine winter first. The fire in the hearth burns low, more smoke than flame, and the chill creeps across the floor. There's no insulation, no double-glazed windows, just shutters rattling in the wind and thin walls that leak every ounce of warmth. You and your family huddled together on the bed, stacking blanket on blanket. Your dog curled at your feet as one more source of heat. Your breath puffs in pale clouds above your face. Sometimes it gets so cold that the water bucket by the wall freezes overnight. You tug the blanket tighter, knowing full well that without shared body heat, frostbite or worse wasn't impossible. For peasants, warmth meant layers, wool shirts, wool blankets, wool stockings. Furs were prized but expensive, and most people couldn't afford them. Instead, they might line the bed with straw or hang a coarse curtain around the frame to block drafts. Nobles, of course, slept with thick fur throws, sometimes multiple layers of pelts stacked on top of each other, until the bed became a mound of warmth. But even in castles, winters were brutal. Historians still argue whether noble chambers were warmer than peasant cottages. Some point to stone walls and massive fireplaces. Others argue those same stone walls held the cold like a cavern. Either way, no one in Europe was escaping the bite of January air. And then there's the flip side, summer. The very blankets that save you in winter become unbearable in July. You toss and turn, sticky with sweat, swatting at buzzing insects that slip in through open shutters. There's no fan, no gentle hum of AC, just the thick heat of bodies pressed too close together. Some families moved their bedding outside to sleep in courtyards or fields, where at least a breeze might cool the skin. Imagine trying to rest under the stars, hoping rain doesn't suddenly roll in. Of course, quirky remedies existed. People stuffed herbs like lavender, chamomile, or even wormwood into pillows to keep pests away and add a cooling scent. Others believed rubbing your feet with vinegar before bed might keep the body cooler. In winter, heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth were slipped under the blankets to warm cold toes, an ancestor of the hot water bottle. You lie there, feeling both suffocated and chilled in turn, realizing that every night is a gamble. Will the fire last until dawn? Will the summer air finally cool after midnight? You'd never take your thermostat for granted again. In this world, comfort isn't guaranteed. It's earned by piling on blankets, huddling with family, or simply enduring the sweat until morning. The truth is, you might last one night of this, maybe two. But after a week of shivering winters and sweltering summers, you'd be begging for your modern HVAC. The blankets feel heavy, the air stale. And just when you think you've adjusted to the itching pests and shifting temperatures, another problem creeps in: the soundscape of medieval nights. Sleep isn't silent here. It's an orchestra you never asked to attend. Beside you, someone snores a deep, rattling growl that doesn't stop. Another sleeper coughs in a wet rhythm, while a child tosses, murmuring in their dreams. There's no privacy in these shared sleeping arrangements, and every twitch or sigh echoes in your ear. You try to roll over, pressing your head into the lumpy pillow, but then the rooster outside decides it's time to crow. Hours before dawn, chickens, dogs, cows, and even pigs all sleep nearby, often right inside the house. Their noises bleed into the night. Grunts, bleats, sudden crashes as animals shift in their pens. And if you're unlucky enough to live in a town, it gets worse. Bells ring to mark time, sometimes every hour, tolling relentlessly through the darkness. Market carts clatter on cobbles as early traders get a head start. Stray dogs bark at shadows, and drunk villagers stumble home, singing or fighting. For peasants, quiet is rare. For nobles, it's different, but no better. Large castles act like echo chambers. Every step of a guard, every gust of wind whistling through a corridor amplifies into a low hum. Rats scurry behind walls, owls screech outside the high windows, and the occasional servant trips over themselves in the dark, rattling the chamber door. You try to block it out, but even sleep itself brings new sounds. Historians still argue whether the heavy snoring and coughing in records point to chronic illness or just poor diet and smoky air. Either way, people weren't exactly graceful sleepers. One quirky note: flatulence was often joked about in medieval texts. Because yes, when you're packed shoulder to shoulder with your entire household, every noise is shared. You can't hide anything. Some remedies attempted to bring peace to the nights. Nobles sometimes used musicians or soft chanting before bed to drown out ambient noise. Religious chants could also serve as lullabies. For the average villager, the answer was usually exhaustion. Work from dawn until dusk left bodies so drained that you collapsed into slumber. No matter the racket. Still comma, the sounds never fully vanish. You lie awake, cataloging them one by one: the rooster's premature call, the squeak of a mouse, the slow creak of the wooden beams above you. There's a rhythm to it, almost like a lullaby born of chaos. Yet if you're used to modern silence machines and noise-canceling headphones, this medieval cacophony would probably drive you mad before the week is out. By now, you've given up on the idea that medieval sleep was restful. But even if you managed to drift off between the noise and the pests, you'd still be facing one of the strangest parts of the night: waking up halfway through. People in the Middle Ages often practiced what's called segmented sleep. Instead of 8 hours straight, the night was divided into 2 chunks, broken by an hour or 2 of being awake in the middle. You blink awake sometime after midnight, the fire in the hearth now little more than glowing embers. Everyone else stirs too. This isn't unusual, it's expected. You sit up, rub your eyes, and stretch your stiff limbs. In some households, this first sleep was followed by quiet prayer. For others, it was time to check the animals, stoke the fire, or even visit neighbors. Yes, people really wandered between homes in the pitch dark, carrying lanterns to share gossip or advice during this in-between period. Imagine yourself slipping out of bed, toes freezing on the floor, while outside the stars glitter in an unpolluted sky. The streets are empty, but you know behind each door, other families are awake too. Some couples used this break for intimacy, believing it was the healthiest time for conception. Others simply sat in silence, staring at the glowing coals, letting their thoughts drift. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universal or more common in rural areas than in towns. Some claim it was a result of short winter days and long nights, while others believe it was simply natural without artificial lighting. Either way, it shows how different the rhythm of life once was. Quirky medical advice even suggested that the hour between sleeps was the best time to read dreams, since your mind was half tethered to the spiritual world. Manuals sometimes encouraged people to record what visions came to them after first waking, treating it as a glimpse into hidden truths. Ukama, however, mostly feel groggy. Sitting in the dim light, you wonder how anyone got used to this routine. And yet, by the time your eyes grow heavy again, you slide back under the blanket for your second sleep. When dawn finally arrives, you're expected to be ready for a full day's labor, as though the night was perfectly restful. But you and I both know it wasn't. The first gray light of dawn seeps in through the cracks, and you realize something strange in the medieval world. Waking up isn't just about your body rising from rest. It's a performance. Morning rituals matter, even when sleep has been patchy and filled with interruptions. You push back the heavy blanket, and the air bites immediately at your skin. There's no hitting snooze, no coffee machine waiting. The rooster has already been yelling for hours, and now you're expected to stumble out of bed and into duty. For peasants, this means going straight into chores. You shuffle to the hearth to revive the fire, carefully blowing into the ashes until flames return. Maybe you head outside to milk the cows or feed the pigs, your breath puffing in the cold air. There's no gentle easing into the day. It's work before your eyes are even fully open. Sleepiness lingers, but the rhythm of life demands obedience. For nobles, waking comes with its own peculiar drama. Servants creep into chambers to help their lords or ladies rise. Curtains are pulled back, prayers recited, and in some cases, elaborate washing routines begin with basins of cold water. Imagine being half asleep and having an audience while you're still yawning. Privacy doesn't exist here either. Historians still argue whether most people rose at dawn or if segmented sleep allowed for a slightly later start. Some records suggest peasants often woke earlier than nobles, while other texts imply everyone was ruled by the rising sun. What is clear, though, is that sleeping in was nearly impossible. The noise of animals, the chill creeping in, and the expectations of labor all conspired to shove you into wakefulness. A quirky detail: some households believed in lucky rising. The idea was that the foot you placed first on the floor could shape the fortune of your day. Get it wrong, and you might invite bad luck before breakfast. So, you carefully choose right foot or left, as if your survival depends on it. You try to shake off the grogginess, but the irony is clear. After a night filled with itching straw, midnight waking, and relentless noise, the morning expects you to be cheerful and productive. You probably wouldn't survive long without a nap. But naps, too, had their rules and suspicions. And that, you'll soon discover, brings a whole new set of strange sleep habits. You've barely stumbled through the morning when your body starts begging for more rest. It makes sense. How could anyone thrive on broken sleep, cold drafts, and itchy bedding? And yet, naps in the medieval world were complicated, depending on who you were and what you did. Sneaking a little daytime rest could be either practical wisdom or a sign of laziness. If you're a peasant, the rhythm of the fields doesn't always allow for long daytime sleep. But during harvest, or after exhausting early labor, it wasn't unusual to catch a brief rest in the shade. You picture yourself lying on a rough cloak beneath a tree, tools beside you, eyes fluttering shut as cicadas hum. This little break might be only minutes, But it's enough to take the edge off. In monasteries, however, naps were structured into the day. Monks had their lives ruled by bells, and one of those intervals sometimes included a sanctioned rest, especially after long night vigils. You imagine yourself as a weary monk, finally laying your head on a wooden bench, the silence of stone halls wrapping around you like a heavy blanket. But not everyone approved. Some preachers railed against sleeping during the day, framing it as indulgent. Sleep was seen as a cousin of sin, too much of it, and you risked moral decay. Historians still argue whether naps were considered more acceptable in rural communities, where physical labor was punishing, than in cities, where idleness was more closely watched. A quirky tidbit: physicians sometimes prescribed short naps for health, but with odd rules. One medieval manual suggested you should only nap sitting upright to prevent corrupted vapors from settling in your chest. So there you are, trying to snooze in the world's most uncomfortable position, just to keep your humors balanced. Still, naps had their place. They were survival tools in a society where nighttime rest was anything but reliable. You imagine yourself dozing lightly, half worried you'll be scolded for laziness, half grateful for the stolen moment of peace. And just as you drift off, the noise of the world, the clatter of hooves, the calls of neighbors pulls you back, reminding you that even in the day, true rest is never guaranteed. By now, you've learned that sleep in medieval times wasn't just about when or how you rested, but also about what you believed happened while you slept. Dreams, in particular, carried enormous weight. You slide back into bed after a tiring day, and instead of treating your dreams as random brain static, you brace yourself for messages, warnings, or even glimpses of the divine. If you dream of water, you might be told it represents cleansing or temptation. If you see animals, each one carries meaning: dogs for loyalty, snakes for danger, birds for spiritual ascent. People pore over dream manuals, flipping through interpretations as if consulting a medieval Google. You, half asleep and twitching under your blanket, are suddenly convinced that the rooster you dreamed about is more than just a rooster. Historians still argue whether most people truly believed dreams carried messages from God, or whether this was mainly the obsession of clergy and scholars. Some texts suggest peasants used dreams in practical ways. Dreaming of a bad harvest might push a farmer to be extra cautious, just in case. Others imply that only the literate elite obsessed over symbolism. The truth, as usual, is probably messy and somewhere in between. Quirky detail. Some people even hired interpreters for particularly vivid dreams, much like fortune tellers. Imagine trudging through the muddy streets to pay someone just to tell you that the cheese wheel in your dream means good fortune. You're also aware that nightmares were terrifying, not just because they startled you awake, but because they were thought to involve demons pressing down on your chest. You shift uncomfortably, half wondering if the weight you feel at night is just your own body, or something darker. The idea of the night hag lurks at the edge of your imagination. So you lie there, drifting in and out, caught between belief and skepticism. Your dreams might be harmless nonsense, or they might be messages from heaven or hell. Either way, you don't get to dismiss them. In medieval sleep, even your unconscious hours come with homework. Sleep in the medieval world isn't just about when you rest or what you dream. It's also about who you rest beside. You ease into another long night and realize quickly that privacy is a luxury you don't have. Beds, if they exist at all, are rarely just yours. Families often pile in together, siblings shoulder to shoulder, parents wedged at the edges, even grandparents tucked in somewhere if space allows. The body heat helps keep everyone warm, but it also means you're constantly elbowed in the ribs or nudged awake by someone's snoring dot. If you're traveling, the experience gets even stranger. Inns are expensive and few, so you end up in a common bed, sharing the straw mattress with strangers who might smell of sweat, ale, or worse. You keep your pouch clutched tight to your chest and try not to think about the lice that might already be crawling between the sheets. Still, in a cold night, even the warmth of strangers can feel like a blessing. Historians still argue whether this practice of bed sharing was more about economics or social bonding. Some evidence suggests that sleeping beside others was considered a form of trust, a way of showing loyalty. Other accounts point to poverty as the main reason why waste resources on multiple beds when one suffices. Either way, you don't get much say. The quirky part? Sometimes bed-sharing arrangements were completely formalized. Apprentices might sleep beside their masters, travelers paired up in inns by the keeper, even pilgrims assigned random bunkmates on the road. It sounds awkward now, but back then, personal space was not exactly a concept. You lie awake, listening to the slow breathing around you, occasionally jolted when someone mutters in their sleep. Maybe you laugh quietly at the absurdity. Maybe you shiver with unease, but either way, you're not alone. And as you finally drift, it's clear. In this world, sleep is as much a social act as it is a personal one. You stretch out once more, but this time, the world around you feels different. The medieval rhythms you've been living in the first sleep, the second sleep, the constant company, the creaky beds, the smoky candles, all of it begins to blur as time pushes forward. You're still lying there, but slowly, you start to notice the transition into what we'd call modern habits. By the 17th and 18th centuries, city life changes everything. Gas lamps flicker on in streets, shops stay open later, and people don't want to crawl into bed as soon as the sun sets. Sleep compresses into one long stretch, closer to the pattern you're used to now. The idea of 2 sleeps with a waking gap in between starts to fade. Historians still argue whether this shift was natural, driven by technology and social change, or whether it was forced, shaped by employers and factory bells in the coming industrial age. A quirky fact slips in. For a while, doctors worried continuous sleep might actually be unhealthy. They warned that lying in bed for 7 or 8 hours straight could clog your body with bad humors. Ironically, what you think of as normal today was once seen as suspicious. Beds also evolve. Nobles no longer want to display their sleeping chambers publicly. Privacy becomes fashionable. Curtains close, doors shut, and the bed turns into an intimate, guarded space. By the 19th century, bedrooms as we imagine them, now personal, private sanctuaries take hold. You finally get your own bed, your own blanket, and hopefully fewer lice. You roll over, and it's almost like waking up in your own century. No ropes to tighten, no chamber pots by your pillow, no neighbors snoring beside you. Just one long, uninterrupted night of rest. But as you think back on everything you've experienced in medieval sleep, part of you wonders if we lost something too. The softness of shared warmth, the stillness of candlelight, the mystery of dreams treated as portals to other worlds. Now, comma. As your eyes grow heavier, let the medieval world fade into the background. The crowded beds, the flicker of rushlights, the whisper of prayers, all of it grows distant, like a faint echo. You no longer feel the tug of ropes under a straw mattress, or the weight of another body pressed close for warmth. Instead, you sink into the quiet of your own space, where the only sound is the slow rhythm of your breath. Imagine the night stretching wide and calm around you. The sky outside is steady, unbroken, a soft darkness that asks nothing of you. No bells call you to prayer. No footsteps shuffle across a cold floor. No dreams demand interpretation. You are free to rest without duty, without superstition, without interruption. The world can wait. Each breath you take carries you deeper into calm, as if the heavy tapestries of medieval halls are drawing shut around your mind, muffling every distraction. The sounds of rats in the rafters, the rustle of fleas in straw, the voices of neighbors murmuring in their sleep, all slip further and further away, until you're left with stillness. Allow yourself to drift as slowly as you want. Let your muscles loosen, your thoughts soften, your body sink. Even if the medieval world was restless, yours doesn't have to be. You can borrow their warmth, their sense of ritual, their simplicity, and then leave behind their discomforts. Soon, the only thing that matters is the rhythm of night, timeless and gentle. Your body knows the way. Your mind has permission to stop holding on. You are safe. You are quiet. You are already halfway to sleep.